frustrating disease for physician, for patient, and for family. We really don't know what causes it, despite the fact that it's the fourth leading cause of death among the elderly. And it's a killer twice. First the mind, then the body. Brain cells literally become twisted, and forgetfulness leads to confusion and then to full-blown dementia. Patients may not know if it's day or night, may not be able to feed themselves or know when to hold their bladder or bowels. They may not even recognize their own family. Alzheimer robs the patient of the best things in life, robs their families of loved ones, leaving them basically with a mindless body. Barbara, joining us now in the studio is Kitty Roberts. She's a daughter of a woman with Alzheimer's. It seems like this is almost worse than death.
It is.
How old is your mother?
My mother just turned 62.
And she's been a victim of Alzheimer's how long?
About 10 years, but it's only been diagnosed for 5 years. So there was quite a few years we didn't know what was wrong with her.
What was happening to her that made you know something was wrong?
Well, she quit taking care of herself like she used to. Her cooking became worse, or it was good, but you just noticed that there was something wrong with her cooking. The way she dressed. She would button her clothes wrong, put things on backwards. Just didn't care about herself quite as much as she used to.
It took a long time for this to develop.
It was a gradual process because you'd ask her what's wrong with her and she wouldn't know what was. She'd say, I'm fine. But yet you could see that she wasn't quite the same person, but I didn't really interfere in her life, so I just kind of sat back and watched it happen. And then as she progressively got worse, you know, I started speaking up, and she still wouldn't admit to anything. And then finally, about 5 years ago, her husband called and said they had diagnosed it as Alzheimer's, and then a lot of the strange behavior came together that you could understand.
Okay. I want to mention to our audience that we invite your phone calls on the subject of Alzheimer's disease. You can reach us at 874-0222. So please call with some questions. Along with us today is Dr. Leon Epstein, who's director of the Alzheimer's Center at UCSF. Doctor, is it usual that a family goes for so many years before you have a diagnosis?
That is true. There are several reasons for that. One is that this is an insidious disease, and it progresses slowly. And families, in a sense, prefer not to see this happening to a loved one and may ignore the early signs. At a subsequent time, they cannot be ignored.
Is it really a disease, or is it just people getting old?
There's no question. It is a specific disease which can be positively diagnosed microscopically. In clinical studies with appropriate examinations without microscopic evidence, we are accurate to approximately 90%.
We've had recent development. There was a news conference given last week about a new drug, or at least it was newly released drug, that may be of some value. Is it really some hope?
This is not a new drug. Dr. Summers of UCLA with his co-investigators published an article on this about 5 or 6 years ago, in which they showed that it may enhance the concentration of a certain compound in the brain, which is found to be less present in Alzheimer's disease. What is different about the way they have used it in this current study is that they have more carefully, with newer techniques, established the diagnosis. They've also been able to establish the level of the compound in the body, which they could not before.
Is it hopeful?
It is very hopeful in the sense that if this proves to be validated in subsequent studies, it is hopeful that persons with the illness may have some amelioration of their symptoms. Dr. Summers and others agree. This is absolutely not a cure, but it is palliative for a period of time.
For now, anyway. We do have a phone call. Gary in Union City has a question for one of our guests. Gary?
Yes, my grandmother has been recently diagnosed as having Alzheimer's. I want to know, back in the early days of when we first recognized that something was happening, could we have stop the process from happening, or is there anything that could have been done?
In prior years, an assortment of illnesses, what's referred to under the basket term of senility, and these have been divided now. Many of these can be approached, and the patient's condition can be ameliorated. On the other hand, we are now able far better to make the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease, which is only one of a number which may cause interference with intellectual functions.
So you need to check with your physician and see if the diagnosis can be made, but you really can't stop the progress of it at this point.
At this point, there's no information as to stop the process of it. The Alzheimer's Center at the University of California in San Francisco is one of 6 established by the state of California to assist in the diagnosis of the illness, but also, at least as important, to work closely with the family on how to deal with these growing changes in a very loved one.
Right.
Kitty, any advice for people who may be facing this, the situation that you face?
Call the Alzheimer's survival thing and get either a social worker to help you, because you don't really know what to do. And they're the ones that helped me decide a lot of my decisions when I had to place my mother in a home. They work with you closely and try to find the best place for your loved one that you want.
We have a telephone call now from David in San Francisco. David, you have a question, please?
Yeah, I think my question was sort of just answered. My grandmother has Alzheimer's disease, and my parents don't live here locally. But my father's just reached retirement age, and it seems like he's not retiring and continuing to work on to help my grandmother meet her bills and keep her in an independent living situation at a time when they should be retiring and really enjoying their life. And I was wondering if there's some type of national support group for families who have Alzheimer's victims in the family.
Dr. Epstein?
Indeed, there is. In fact, self-help groups and the Alzheimer's disease and related groups in the community do a phenomenally excellent service working with family members on how to deal with this. What has been your experience with them?
They've been very helpful.
How did you, or how does anyone overcome the feeling of guilt, I would think, if you have to put the family member in a home? And as this gentleman just said, his father is keeping on working to help his mother, and
I don't think you ever get over the feeling of guilt.
you don't.
No. If you see they're taken care of, and you know you can't handle it anymore, there comes a time you have to put them in the home. And then you just go in as much as you can and see that they're all right. But I don't really think you ever get over the sadness of having to place somebody in a home.
You wanted to keep her at home. You did.
I did keep her at home, and she left my house every few minutes and would get down by the creek where I live, and I have a tri-level, and she was wandering in the middle of the night. So neighbors of mine came over to rescue me and say, Kitty, you cannot keep her here any longer. You have to do something.
For her safety.
Right. She was hurting herself.
Yeah.
Falling down and breaking bones and stuff.
That's difficult. One question that we've wondered, Doctor, is there any degree of this disease being hereditary?
The newer findings suggest that this may be so to some degree. That certainly needs a lot more information before one could give any kind of genetic advice to a specific person.
There's also a relationship to Down syndrome, I read in some of the literature.
That is true. Down syndrome patients develop Alzheimer neuropathological evidence very early in life. And one may see it in late teens.
What do you think about this? Does that affect you? Does that bother you when you hear that it may be genetically related?
Well, you worry about it. I worry for my kids. I also worry for myself that I have a family, and I see financially when you have to place somebody in a home, it is very expensive to place somebody in a home, and it could wipe out, you know,
everything.
If you're married and you don't have things taken care of, it can go into, you know, my husband, if I ever had it, you know, it would go into our savings, and he would still have to live.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
all of you, for joining us today on the subject of Alzheimer's disease. Kathleen Roberts, Dr. Leon Epstein, and John Fowler for your report. And now we're going to go back to San Francisco and find out what Patrick is up to. Pat?
Well, Barbara, coming up next in just a couple of minutes.